right, when we talk about the countercurrent mechanism, basically we're going to be using the kidney's medulla, which is going to have an osmotic gradient. So when you say countercurrent mechanism, this is going to be the way that we create and maintain medullary, so the medulla, osmotic gradient. Osmotic gradient means different concentrations of solutes by exchanging materials in opposite directions. Now we have three different things that we talk about with the countercurrent mechanism. But before I go into that, basically what we're going to be focusing on is the renal medulla. So we're looking at a special nephron called the juxtamedullary cells. The juxtamedullary cells are going to be the neurons, not cells. The juxtamedullary neurons are going to be the neurons that dip deep into the renal medulla and are the most important for the countercurrent mechanism. So, the medulla. First we need to start with is drawing our glomerulus. So here is your afferent arteriole and your efferent arteriole. Your renal corpuscle involves the glomerular capsule. You have your proximal convoluted tubule, then your descending limb of loop of Henle, your ascending limb of loop of Henle, and your distal convoluted tubule. So, the countercurrent mechanism is only going to involve nephrons that are just next to the medulla. So this right here represents your medulla. So in your medulla, your renal medulla, this is going to be super concentrated layers of salt. Now we know that salt is going to be absorbed only on the descending limb over here, NaCl. Now one thing I will tell you about kidneys is every time that fluid goes through your juxtamedullary nephron, you are going to increase the amount of salt by 4 times. So every time fluid goes through this juxtamedullary nephron, you're going to increase the salt concentration by 4 times. So when we say countercurrent mechanism, it's occurring with the juxtamedullary nephron, and the capillary bed down here is going to be called the vasa recta, which you're going to hear me talk about. So out here, you're going to have high concentration of sodium chloride. Now it's only absorbed on the descending limb. So that's where we start to say countercurrent multiplier. The countercurrent multiplier is basically in the nephron loops, how the descending limb, every time your filtrate goes through, you're going to multiply the amount of salt in your medullary area by 4 times. So you're going to create an osmotic gradient. You have salt that multiplies every 4 times. So when we say countercurrent mechanism, there's going to be 3 different things that we talk about. It involves the countercurrent multiplier, it's also going to include the countercurrent exchanger, and it's going to involve concentrating urine. Again, these all occur in the juxtamedullary nephrons. Now, when you use the word countercurrent, the countercurrent is talking about the fluid that is moving down the descending limb being different than the fluid going up the ascending limb. So, I'll draw this out here in a second, but I'm going to write out this definition. Countercurrent is referencing the fluid going down the descending limb of the loop of Henle, which creates a current or a difference that is counter, meaning opposite, to the fluid moving up the ascending limb. Now, I want to draw this out. We're going to start with the countercurrent multiplier. So we need to draw out our nephron. You should know the type of nephron involved with the countercurrent multiplier. Now, we're not talking a whole lot about the renal corpuscle. We just know that the filtrate is formed there. All right, so filtrate is going to leave the renal corpuscle to the proximal convoluted tubule. And then it's going to go up the ascending limb to the distal convoluted tubule. Your distal convoluted tubule is going to collect urine in the collecting duct, which is this. This is a new thing. So we can label everything here. Proximal convoluted tubule, distal convoluted tubule. Now, we know that all of this is occurring in the renal medulla. So, the first thing I want to talk about is the countercurrent multiplier. Now, to understand the countercurrent multiplier, the first thing that I need to discuss is that the proximal convoluted tubule, if you remember, is going to reabsorb back into the body 65% of water, electrolytes, back into the blood. Glucose, 100%. We reabsorb most of our things back to the blood at the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, when we talk about the filtrate coming down, here's the filtrate. The filtrate coming down the proximal convoluted tubule is going to be isotonic to the blood that is out here. So I'm going to write inside of the tube, it's isotonic. It's an isotonic solution when you compare the blood to the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, in the countercurrent mechanism, one of the things that occurs is you have this isotonic solution coming down. But what happens is your water is going to get reabsorbed on the descending limb of the loop of Henle. So, you're going to reabsorb water on this side. So, if you take all of the water of the isotonic solution, so you have now more solutes than you have water, so this is 25% of your water that you take out, that would make this now hypertonic. So now your filtrate is traveling down the descending limb, And as it travels down the descending limb, we are pulling out water. Now, at the same time, we are going to be putting in sodium. So, the filtrate, as it travels down the descending limb, because we keep pulling out water, it becomes hypertonic. Because it has a lot of salt in it, it is now hypertonic inside of the loop of Henle. So, as it goes up and it starts to go to the descending limb, what we do is we start to pull out sodium chloride. Now, we pull out more sodium chloride than we do water. We're pulling a lot of sodium chloride out. So as this passes, you're pulling out all the sodium chloride. Well, when you pull out all the sodium and it goes up, we now say that as it reaches the distal convoluted tubule, going up, it is now going to be considered hypotonic. Because now you've pulled out all the sodium. Now, what happens is the medulla, this is called the interstitial space in between, your medulla, every time this happens, is going to increase the amount of concentration of sodium on the inside. So over here, we're also going to be increasing sodium chloride. Now, this is going to increase the amount of sodium chloride by 4 times. So this is the countercurrent. It went from hypertonic to hypotonic, and it is countercurrent because water's being pulled out on one side and sodium's being poured out on the other, but we call it the countercurrent multiplier because we increase the concentration of salt on the inside of the medulla by 4 times. So this is the countercurrent multiplier. Occurs in the nephron loop of the juxtamedullary nephrons. Countercurrent multiplier. We're multiplying the amount of salt in the medullary interstitial fluid. So, overview. As you have hypertonic fluid moving into the ascending limb, you're going to have sodium chloride being absorbed on the ascending limb, which is going to multiply the amount of sodium in the interstitial fluid of the medullary medulla of the kidney. So the tissue, if it is increasing by 4 times, when we talk about the medulla, we also say this is the interstitial fluid or the tissue of the kidney. If it multiplies by 4 times, again, this is called multiplier, we would say the interstitial fluid is hypertonic. Now, the next fluid that comes through, so water is going to come down the proximal convoluted tubule. As water comes down, because there's so much salt in your kidneys, so you even have salt over here, water is going to be pulled out on the descending limb of loop of Henle, making the fluid hypertonic because you're pulling out water. So hyper means more solutes than you do have solvent. So you have to remember it's isotonic as it reaches the proximal convoluted tubule. Now water is going to go out towards the salt concentration, but when you pull water out of the nephron tube, it becomes hypertonic. Now as it comes up, we pull out salt. When you pull out salt, it becomes hypotonic. That's the countercurrent multiplier. This is the first way that we basically create and maintain an osmotic gradient to make concentrated urine. So this is the first thing. So the next thing that we said is the countercurrent exchanger. So we're going to have to draw this out as well. Now, the countercurrent exchanger is involving the capillary beds of the vasa recta. All right, so we're gonna draw out everything that we just did. Red represents my blood vessels. My proximal convoluted tubule. Again, all of this is going on in the medulla. I'm not going to draw the medulla on this one. The vasa recta is the capillary bed that is found around juxtamedullary nephrons. So, distal convoluted tubule, proximal convoluted tubule. Now, we're going to talk about the countercurrent exchanger. Before we do that, we're going to say the fluid leaving is isotonic. We need to understand that. Then it's going to be hypertonic as it comes down the loop of Henle. And then as it goes up, it is going to be hypotonic. Now, we also know that water is going to be reabsorbed to the capillary bed on the descending limb. Sodium chloride is going to be reabsorbed on the ascending limb. And every time it does this, this is going to create 4 times the concentration. So that's the countercurrent multiplier. Now we're talking about the vasa recta, the capillary bed. So the countercurrent exchanger, basically you have your capillary bed. I'm just going to draw it like this. This is your vasa recta. And your vasa recta is going to do the opposite. So to help make this hypertonic, on this side, you're going to exchange sodium. So we're going to actually deposit NaCl from the blood, from the vasa recta into the descending limb of the loop of Henle, which also makes it hypertonic. So since we reabsorb sodium here and water over here, the exchange is going to happen opposite over here because we need to make it hypotonic. So on this side, from the vasa recta, you're going to be depositing water. You're going to reabsorb water. So that is the countercurrent exchanger. If you add more water and you take out the sodium, then it becomes hypotonic. So the vasa recta is the capillary bed of juxtamedullary nephrons, which is going to help concentrate urine. So we're not done just yet because we have to reabsorb the rest of the water at the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So the last thing that we have is concentrating our urine. Okay, so concentrating urine involves the countercurrent mechanism, which is the countercurrent multiplier, the countercurrent exchanger, and now we have to concentrate our urine. So again, we're back at the nephron. This is occurring on at the medullary. So we have our afferent arteriole, our glomerulus, our efferent arteriole. You have your capsule. You have your proximal convoluted tubule, the descending limb of loop of Henle, the ascending limb of loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule. Now all urine is going to drain into what we call a collecting duct. The collecting duct is also going to be found within the medulla with the part of the nephron. This is going to lead to the apex of the medulla where urine drains. So urine is going to be formed by filtrate. We can say isotonic fluid is traveling down. This would be hypertonic. Now we need to understand why it's hypertonic. That would be because you're taking water and you're reabsorbing it here. At the same time, while you're reabsorbing water, sodium is going to go in. On your ascending limb, you're going to reabsorb sodium chloride. At the same time, you're going to be placing water into it, so it's opposite. That's the countercurrent exchanger. And then this is going to be hypotonic solution.